Not even James Earl Jones could save this stink pot.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
Are they in the proper approach pattern for today?
Negative.
All weapons! Now! Charge the lightning field.
Welcome back to Dispatch Agent.
Yeah, that's right. That's our show.
Anywho,
do you remember any urban legends from the 90s, perchance?
Yes.
No, I'm asking. Do you? I mean, yeah. What are your?
I mean, we kind of did a whole episode on. I think we kind of did maybe 2 episodes on urban legends, and
did we?
Yeah.
Well, we did horror.
Well, we did an urban legends episode where we looked at urban legends and like the true origins of those.
Origins, yes, that's yes, that's true.
But you're talking about like, say, you eat Pop Rocks and drink a 2-liter of soda, your stomach's gonna explode.
Exactly.
Or that there are actually mutant alligators in the sewers. Or that a famous actor put a gerbil up his ass and it got stuck there.
That's unfortunately true. What was the other one? Where like a kid, jerked off into the Alfredo sauce at some banquet that he was working at a hotel or whatever. You ever heard that one?
No. You know what this reminds me of? That Crash Test Dummy song? Once there was this kid who jerked off into the Alfredo sauce at the garden.
I didn't say Olive Garden. That's about right. Yeah. And that kid was called Jeremy, which later became a Pearl Jam song.
Jeremy, come in. Sauce today.
Well, this story, strangely enough, fits right into the category of urban legends from when we were kids, and spread like wildfire throughout the youth of today, of that day. And again, this huge myth, the things surrounding it. And the crazy part is, some of it is 100% true.
Mm-hmm.
So the earliest appearances of this on the internet be found in the archives of Usenet, which is not a free use porn site. It's actually a different website. It says that a new game appeared in several suburban arcades in Portland, Oregon in November 1981. The game resembled a different game called Tempest. They always refer to it as Tempest-like. And
what is Tempest?
So Tempest was an arcade game in 1981 by Atari, programmed by Dave Thurer, Theurrer.
Thor.
It's Thor who's passing out. That makes sense in my head. It takes,
yeah, right.
So there's like a 3-dimensional plane, and it's split up into lanes like a bowling alley, or sometimes it's like a tube, like Sonic 2, and you can see it from one end, obviously, and then you control a claw-like thing that they call a blaster, and it sits on the edge, and it snaps from segment to segment, like because you're using a knob, like a turn knob, rotary knob.
Yeah.
Using that, slobbing on that knob. I got that.
Nice.
This game was actually relatively groundbreaking because it was the first one to use proprietary Atari invention called color quadriscan vector display technology. Rolls off the tongue, really. So, really interestingly, it was the first game to let players choose what level they started on. It was called a skill step. So if you were good at the game, you could just skip ahead and not do the preliminary stuff. It's actually a pretty good idea.
Yeah, and became quite prevalent in games later after that.
It sure does. Yeah, which, I mean, it basically meant you could just pick up where you left off, really. I mean, for considering how simplistic this was. It was also one of the first games with where levels themselves changed. Instead of the level just getting harder, the layout and the gameplay changed per level.
So, for example, say the first one's like a circular tube, and then it goes to like a square, and then more like a cross shape, and then diamond formation that's broken up into 4 different quadrants.
Essentially, yeah.
Further and further, the shape gets more complicated, and the game gets harder and harder to...
Which sounds dumb for people today, but in fact, that we grew up with Atari originally, and in those scenarios, it was always like Space Invaders. It was the same exact level, it just got faster. Same thing with Asteroids, or basically any Atari game. It would just be the same thing, you just have to do it really fast.
Yeah.
The goal was to survive as long as possible. The way it looked was essentially the first Tron.
Yeah, it's very Tron-like. You can definitely see where the creators of that movie took some inspiration from the aesthetic of something like that.
I can't back it up, but I would say this probably heavily influenced Tron, because this was such a groundbreaking game. Oh, you have a super zapper. Good. That's great.
Well, I mean, it's just the zapper my mother gave me. I don't... If you want to call it super...
She said it was special.
I mean, it's always zapped well enough for, you know what I'm saying.
No, I don't. So it was initially designed to be a first... It was honestly one of the first-person shooter games is set in that sort of layout. It was originally conceived as a first-person remake of Space Invaders.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And, funny enough, the designer and programmer said that it came from a nightmare he had.
Fuck.
Pretty cool.
If you're going to sleep and you're having a nightmare where you're falling through a hole and it keeps morphing digitally...
And monsters pop out? Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
The original name of it was Aliens.
Well, I mean...
Game over, man! This is basically a really groundbreaking game that deals with a different type of graphics layout than in previous Atari venture. I mean, it really is groundbreaking by its setup and perspective, which is so dumb today. But it's essentially like when video games went from 2D side-scrolling to 3D, which is when I gave video games up.
Too complicated for me.
That's literally what happened, yes. My brother had a PlayStation. I'm like, I don't want it. Get out of here. So that's Tempest. Now, this game was said to be similar to Tempest in its layout design, but far more complicated. It had rapidly shifting kaleidoscope-like puzzles, spinning and morphed in numeric shapes, and supposedly subliminal messages.
Ooh, those are my favorite kind.
You would know, though. Subliminal, you don't know.
I know.
It was a wonder to behold, apparently. It was a huge hit. It created these insane visuals and really difficult gameplay that was exactly what hardcore arcade nerds were looking for. It became so popular, in fact, that not just teenagers, but adults were gathering around the game like it's Yellow Jackets when they do that thing. I don't want to spoil Yellow Jackets. But have you not seen that far?
No, what did you say?
I said it's like Yellow Jackets when they do that thing.
I've seen all of Yellow Jackets. I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is you're... They...
Oh my god, dude. Could not do this with you right now.
Sorry, that was subliminal. You weren't supposed to see it.
Was it? And apparently this was so addictive. I mean, people were standing in line for hours on end, which eventually broke down into physical altercations, fist fights, pushing people over, people bribing people. And it got to the point where the fervor got so intense that many of the people who had actually managed to play it for long periods at a time, I don't know how, maybe they had bodyguards, would start suffering side effects from it.
Side effects?
Yeah, including memory loss, later on nightmares, paranoia, insomnia. Now, the crazy thing is to have a nightmare while being an insomnia. That's...
We call that a waking nightmare, but unfortunately, I can't remember.
Daymare. And some of them, it was rumored, fall into catatonic-like states or comas, and in their minds would flash words and phrases from the game. And the rumor goes, in its ultimate climax of the legend, some players actually gave up the game like it was a lifestyle choice, like they're quitting meth or whatever. And one of them became an anti-video game crusader.
Like, did he have a cape and a sword?
Why did you have a cape and a sword? Come on.
Why not?
You can't have a cool uncle and a jetpack.
Do you want to crusade properly?
This is the last crusade, all right?
I should have sent this game to the Marx Brothers.
Sent it to the University of Chicago in the mail. But now, apparently, people were scarred from this. It deeply affected their well-being and psychological states. A lot of people that played it described it generally like very much like The Tempest, but also like The Dream Machine by Ian Somerville, which came out in 1961. Have you ever heard of The Dream Machine?
It sounds vaguely familiar.
It's totally up your alley. It was kind of a art project, science project type thing where they had these strobing lights, and it's kind of like an effect in a 60s sci-fi show when it goes to like, it fades out and it's just these bright lights everywhere, you know?
Okay.
As a transition scene. It's strobe lights. It was designed to literally alter the brain's alpha wave output. And it would supposedly put you in like a hypnotic state. You were relaxed and in hypnosis for long periods at a time. And then later on, they actually turned it into a real video game, which is funny. Very similar to that, Polybius was thought to do very similar things, but for the purpose of mind control.
It's my favorite kind of control.
I'm a quality control guy myself.
You would be.
The legend goes on to say that in some versions of it, killed themselves, and in some versions of it, people would go on to murder innocent people based on the subliminal messages they received through this video game. Does this sound like any sort of secret CIA program you've heard of?
What's the CIA? Shh. You're not supposed to talk about it.
And then, as the law of the urban legend, supposedly all the arcades that this game was located, after this period of what seems like a test run, mysterious men in black would arrive in nondescript vehicles and collect the game on dollies, wheel it out without saying a word to anyone, and then drive away never to be seen again. Of course, in some versions of it, men in black will show up to service the game. They'll come in and like swap parts in and out, or they'll like work on it, but no one will ever say anything to anybody. So that's basically the whole legend. Now, the weird thing is that some of this is true. I mean, same thing with MK Ultra. So the game was named after Greek historian Polybius. He was in the Middle Hellenistic period. He is famous for a published work called The Histories, which is how I think he was defined as a historian. It was supposed to be the universal history of everything. It would cover about 264 to 146 BCE. It would detail the events that took place in Italy, Iberia, Greece, Macedonia, Syria, Egypt, and the funny thing is, this is what it says in the source that I was looking at earlier. It said, the events in Italy, Iberia, Greece, Macedonia, Syria, Egypt, and Africa. What? Can I get you a map? Would that help?
You know how often that happens?
The great country of Africa. In this, of course, were things like the Macedonian Wars and all that stuff you've never heard of.
What's that?
And of course, there were a lot of these works back then, but I think one of the most important things that sets this apart was that it was one of the only works of that era to survive physically. There are copies of it that were studied by historians and archaeologists, but back then, every Greek had an opinion.
Yeah, no,
Unlike
it's
today.
completely different.
I don't know why I said it that way. Where everybody who published anything had sort of a grand philosophy of the universe, you know? And this one, Polybius talked about the separation of powers in government, checks and balances, going against the concept of the citizenry and talking about the people as a political body. This, of course, would go on to influence John Locke's 2 treatises of government, the framers of the Constitution, obviously, and Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws, which we have touched on Montesquieu
We've
before.
touched in him, but not on him.
No, I was on him. I stood back a few feet. Yeah, man, if you saw that part.
I didn't have anything to begin with.
Supposedly, it was created by a company called Sinnesloshen.
Sinnesloshen.
Sinneslosschn, which roughly translates to sensory deprivation, kind of, or senseless, unable to sense something, essentially.
The deletion of mind.
Okay, which is even more badass. And it's also funny because in German, terrible grammar, apparently. Oh, I forgot to mention the most hilarious part about the wordplay they're doing here. The reason it was called Polybius was not just for the joke of using polygons, but Polybius was born in Arcadia. There you go.
The Polybius game does appear in popular culture quite a few times. One, in the Simpsons episode Please Home, Don't Hammer 'Em,
Yeah.
Bart goes to an arcade, and the cabinet that's right next to the Star Wars when he's going to play is a Polybius. There's also the Polybius was re-released on the PS4 and PSVR in 2017.
Well, it's not a re-release. It's a new game based on it.
Okay, so there was a PC game developer called Rogue Synapse, and they made a, quote, replica of it.
Based on what people say.
Based on what people...
descriptions of the game.
And they even, the owner of that company, founded a company called Sinneschlossen.
That's great.
To, quote, help further recreate the Polybius game as it might have existed in 1981. Okay. And then that version was in a Nine Inch Nails music video, Less Than.
Awesome.
And then in the first season of Loki, when they go to that world where the other Lokis are, there's a bunch of things. One of the things in the background, when the older Loki is talking, is a Polybius arcade cabinet.
This is in the zeitgeist. Even if you haven't heard of it, a lot of people have. Now, the legend sort of culminates in the idea that it's similar to MKUltra. They were trying to do mind control stuff, experimenting on the pale, lonely virgin population in America. And you people go to arcades. So it became almost as infamous as MKUltra. And just like MKUltra, some of this really did happen. Because that dude definitely fell out of that window in MKUltra. Whether he was pushed or jumped, we don't know. So these are the elements we've got. Men in Black showing up to both install and service and then eventually take away the game, never to be seen again. The game is addictive, causing violent outbreaks, riots, hallucinations, seizures, nightmares, catatonia. It's one of the games that uses polygons and vector shapes. And it was only in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, and only for a brief period of time, and no one has been able to find it since. So there's no actual proof that it did exist, but there's a lot of supposition around the idea that it might have. Now, most likely, it's a conflagration of different events. It's almost a Mandela effect, but it's really more an urban legend, but it's very close to, because some of this stuff did happen. There was a Tempest-like game that appeared in Portland in 1981, but it was Tempest. And some people did have negative effects surrounding the game, but it was mostly epileptic issues. There were 9 seizures between the period of 1981 to 84 in arcades in that area, but most of them were actually on home consoles like the Atari. There was only one officially reported seizure instance from a cabinet arcade game. It was Astro Fighter from 1980. And government agents legitimately, in 1981 and 82, came, inspected arcade machines, and wrote down the initials of the high scorers because they wanted to find out the names of possible eyewitnesses in crimes they were investigating. And then some government agents did legitimately seize some games and they did physically inspect certain games, but they were trying to see if these arcade games were a scam. It's very similar to what happened with pinball, where they thought it was a backdoor gambling thing, but it's actually a game of skill. They did inspect arcade games in the early days to see if they were ripping kids off. They were specifically looking for a cord that would lead to some sort of counting device. It's kind of complicated, but that's essentially how it works. And then every now and then, they would find one that they assumed was part of a gambling setup, and they would actually remove it from the game cabinet and leave. So people did see this happening. And there was a government project examining the players of arcade games in November of 1981. But it wasn't in Portland, Oregon. It was actually in Mesquite, Texas at an Aladdin's Castle, which I never liked as much as some of the other arcades, but whatever. Basically, Atari took up umbrance with a Texas ordinance in Mesquite that tried to limit the age of arcade game players, at least coin-operated ones, to 17. And Atari fought back in the courts to get that taken down. Basically, what they did was they tested to see if video games physically addicted enough to warrant that kind of regulation. So they did like a case study on if the kids were just addicted or just lonely. Basically, all of those things are true. And on top of that, in Portland in 1981, 2 different arcade players, gamers if you want, collapsed while playing Tempest. One from a severe migraine and the other playing Asteroids and having unrelated gastrointestinal problems because he was literally playing Asteroids for 28 straight hours to break a world record.
Oh, okay. What? Who's keeping that arcade open for this kid?
Well, apparently it was being filmed. It was a big publicity stunt. So right after that happened, 10 days after that happened, was when the FBI raided several arcades. I know.
Raided.
Well, I mean, so,
It's just ridiculous. That's all.
Oh, it is completely ridiculous. So the FBI did monitor arcades for a while for evidence of tampering and recording high scores, which sounds like a really long way to go around to gamble.
Yeah, but if they were going to do it, like to get secret information and possibly, abduct kids or whatever.
Whatever.
You wouldn't have official documents from the FBI following all this along. You just have shady guys who's not going to say anything.
Men in Black.
Exactly.
No, but yeah, you're right. There are publicly available records. If you file a FOIA request to the FBI, you can get their report on this event, but there's never a mention once about a game called Polybius. So those things are real. Those things are true. But here's why the game isn't true. After doing some sleuthing, there was a guy named Patrick Kellogg who believes that players seeing this are actually playing a video game called Cube Quest, which was briefly released in the early 80s as a shooting game on Laserdisc.
Laserdisc.
And Laserdiscs, especially 1983, were really unreliable, especially the players, and they'd break down all the time. And so people would come in and out without saying anything to anybody and haul off arcade machines. And you combine that with the Tempest game players who, the FBI raiding those and taking things out of those, which do look like Men in Black, you can see how they meld those together. And then, so there's an interesting phenomenon when it comes to things like urban legends and cryptids and things. There's this belief in a lot of these major stories like this that they go back to the date in which they take place. But just like with Roswell and let's say the Chupacabra, Bermuda Triangle, they're not old legends. They're not ancient tales. They're actually just latter half of the 20th century urban legends that people think have been around forever. Like Gremlins, for instance. Gremlins are uniquely set and created as a legend in World War II. I have actually done a lot of research on this one, done a lot of newspaper archive searching for this, and there are some pseudo references to what they called Gremlin right after World War One, but it's all the same idea. It's that, on a plane, when things would go wrong, you'd blame something because you didn't know why it went wrong. So you'd blame something, an outside force that came in and meddled with. And it's usually William Shatner or John Lithgow. So with those legends, they only popped up recently, but we think they go really far back. It wasn't until the 70s that people even knew about the Roswell legend outside of the initial newspaper reports that came out. And the Bermuda Triangle, nobody knew about that until, strangely, the 70s when somebody published a book about it, tying it all together. And the legend of the Chupacabra, I believe, only came about in 1996. A report an old woman gave about a mangy dog that she saw in her backyard.
Sucking goats off.
Goats sucking left and right.
Goat throating.
Goats. She was the throat goat. That's a t-shirt waiting to happen. I can't go on.
Well, that's it.
It's over.
That's like a They Might Be Giant song. Goat throating killed my podcast.
I palindrome I.
I Polybius I.
So this particular legend really only pops up in any sort of like real recorded cohesive way in 1998 on the vintage gaming site coinoff.org. And it said that the game, quote, had a very limited release, 1 or 2 backwater arcades in the suburbs of Portland. And according to some of the rumors, it was, quote, developed by some kind of weird military tech offshoot group. The fuck does that mean? It's like, I think they're saying it's like Skunkworks. And, quote, used some kind of proprietary behavior modification algorithms developed for the CIA. And the stupidest part is, that's believable. And stuff like that did happen back then.
Yeah.
But this urban legend only coalesced in this form in 1998. And it was sort of spread around more broadly in the year 2000 on internet forums, specifically Usenet, before chat rooms and things were even a thing. It sort of grew like a mold in this tiny circle of people who only talk to each other. By just 3 years after, in 2003, it actually popped up in a listicle of urban legends in the magazine Game Pro, which is a pretty big circulated magazine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then in coinup.org's comment section in 2006, a guy named Stephen Roach, that's about right, commented that it was created by a company that he and other, he said, naive programmers began, called Sinnesloshen. So that's where we get that. This guy claims that he created it, founded this company, and that they were hired by a third party and quoted it as a South American company, but that they were never told the purpose of the development or what the game entailed, and that they were completely over their heads programming this experimental technology that they really didn't have a grasp on. He was kind of like that guy that claims to be a time traveler.
Right. Like John Teeter?
Yeah, yes, John Teeter, yeah, that's the guy. He's basically like that, where you're like, okay, dude, all right. Also, one of the other things that I think fed into this was, at one point during that era, a boy named Bobby Feldstein was abducted, he claims, one afternoon from an arcade at the age of 14 at an arcade called Coin Kingdom, and it supposedly started tripping balls. Now, he had a podcast, or he was on a podcast. He was led through a series of underground tunnels. Oh, God. Dumbs? Really?
Well, in Portland, there actually are underground tunnels.
The Shanghai tunnels,
Exactly.
I know. But, I mean, it does sound like some QAnon bullshit here. And that he was found a day later about 60 miles away from his house in the middle of the Tillamook State Forest. Now, I have been to the Tillamook State Forest, and you could very easily get lost there. He claimed that there was another boy with him, and that kid rescued him and got him to civilization. Probably not true, but believable enough.
But, I mean, if you are going to kidnap a kid, an arcade isn't the worst place to do it.
Right?
Tunnels aren't the worst avenue to use.
That's true.
And taking them to an Oregon State Forest isn't the worst place to theoretically do things.
Yeah, except that even he says nothing else happened. He's just sort of tripping and then woke up. And he wasn't like, he never claimed he was molested or that they'd kill him. He just pops up in a forest.
Oh, this is complete devil's advocate.
We can't say either way what happened to this poor gentleman, but he's definitely traumatized by something. He actually later on went back to the arcade to face his fears, and he claimed that the whole ordeal ruined his life. He said, quote, "Doing the tour is a way to exercise my demons on a daily basis."
Exposure therapy, trying to...
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, if it helps him, that's great.
If it works for him, good, I guess.
Yeah, good on you. Yeah. Now, a lot of it's just conflagrations of things that did happen that people didn't understand. And we're talking about a period basically right after MK Ultra became public. It really showed up in the mainstream during the Gerald Ford administration because the family of the guy that jumped out the window finally brought his story out, and the CIA didn't black bag anybody. And they actually met Gerald Ford, and he issued an official apology by the U.S. government for MK Ultra, which people don't remember and don't like talking about now, but that actually happened.
Yeah.
There's footage of it. You can watch it. People had all this paranoia about video games influencing kids. Some kids did collapsed, some of them had seizures, some of them did get kidnapped, but that's the kind of stuff that happens every day. It's not really anything special. And then, it didn't help that in 1983 there was a mass murder in a Texas arcade. So there is a podcast just about this on Radiotopia called The Polybius Conspiracy. We didn't really take a lot from that, just a couple of quotes, but if you're interested in doing that kind of deep dive, feel free. Now, a lot of these are coincidences. A lot of them are just kind of similarly related to things like that. But this comes mostly from my research, personally, and some other guys I know on a show called Astonishing Legend, who are actually friends of mine. I actually was on their research team, so I looked into this a lot. The fulcrum on which the whole story pivots is that the gameplay was described in many accounts as being vector graphics and characteristics of raster graphics. That doesn't sound like a smoking gun, but I wonder what a smoking gun sounds like. But
Hey, it's me.
I did it.
I'm a smoking gun.
And we can go into the difference between vector and raster graphics, but the long and short of it is, it's the difference between a file in Photoshop and a file in Illustrator. So,
Okay.
So vector display graphics define a line that makes up a shape by dealing with 2 points. That creates what they call a Cartesian plane, named after Descartes. Now, raster graphics are different because it's a two-dimensional array of squares called pixels, obviously, which I did not know this, which is funny because I should, because I was a graphic design major. The word pixel is a portmanteau of picture element. I had no clue. It was really
didn't know
interesting.
that.
I didn't either. It's really interesting. And of course, the word raster comes from the Latin rastrum, which means a rake, which ultimately came from radere, which means to scrape. And in its current modern form, comes from the process of raster scanning on a CRT video monitor, because in that, the images are done line by line, either magnetically or electrostatically, with a focused electron beam, which creates this grid. Why that's important is because in the early 80s, there was no computer technology that could do both. They required completely different kinds of programming. There's a reason why we have both Photoshop and Illustrator, because they're different forms of graphical data. There was nothing on Earth that could possibly render both. So it's just not feasible that was a thing. Now, a lot of the other stuff is totally true, just put in the wrong context or mashed together. There is no secret technology that could do that, because if there was, we would have known about it a long time ago, and war games would have been way more interesting. But
Well, we did, since the Roswell crash. In fact, Polybius was alien technology.
it was also the second shooter on the grassy knoll.
Yes,
People don't know.
Polybius did shoot JFK with a time bullet.
More this bullet a time bullet. The sad fact is that that's just not possible. It's really just a conflagration of other things. It's just mashed them all together like a shitty girl talk song, and it hit the exact moment in early internet forums and even in print around the right people who would spread these type of things in the right formats that would spread these type of things at the right time. Because there's just enough evidence you could look back and sort of tie these points together. But it's not real, but man, it'd be really cool if it was, because that sounds like a really awesome chapter in the Men in Black legend. It's just sadly not real. The only way it possibly manifested is because they did actually make a game called Polybius and founded their company called Senesloshin. But that's it. That's all there was. So
Well, look at you just stomping on hopes and dreams.
I stump on popes and dreams. Pretty cool. Actually, it's a fantasy. I go there a lot.
That's my new game, Popes and Dreams.
Oh, so we've got so many things at Friar here. That's kind of all she wrote. It would be really fun if this was real. It sounds like an X-Files episode. And, quite frankly, a lot of the elements of this lead into things like the X-Files. In fact, do they have an episode similar to that?
And they have one where they're playing a video game.
Yeah, that one's stupid.
But that one's more like The Matrix in a way.
It's like Virtuosity or... No, it's
Yeah,
actually like
yeah.
the Lawnmower Man.
It is more like the Lawnmower Man.
Yeah. And then there's the one with Giovanni Ribisi, where he can control lightning or whatever. He spends a lot of time playing in an arcade, I think, in that one. But yeah, they don't literally have a one-to-one. But the reason why is because this legend didn't come about until 1998, which would have been way later in the show. So I guarantee it would have come up.
Yeah.
So, yep. So that's Polybius. And it's a really fun legend that just isn't real, sadly. But like with all urban legends and even other legends in general, sometimes the real story is more interesting. And considering this is a mashup of several other crazy stories, look into the origins of it, because you're going to find some really, really interesting stuff that actually happened. That's why conspiracy theorists are often misguided, because like the truth is way crazier, oftentimes, and not as simplistic. So do that. I was just saying, I'm asking questions. Do your own research.
See, when I look at it, I look at the gematria of Polybius. See, it's what it's saying. It's poly, which there wasn't like poly people before 1998, but before the leftist government, they really kind of took over. Bi, which wasn't a thing. People weren't bi for thousands of years, and then the U.S., the United States, poly, bi, U.S. It's all come together, people. Okay?
It all makes
Video
sense.
games are making people bisexual and transgendered, and it's the Men in Black.
And it's ruining the core of the American family.
It's right there. Open your eyes.
It's all right here. The dots connect.
Kids were getting stolen, and their adrenochrome was drained, which is why they were
In tunnels, underground.
It's there, folks. Come on.
Hillary Clinton was there the whole time.
Do you know what letter isn't in Polybius? Q. Do you know why that is?
They don't want you to fucking know.
Yeah.
And also the frogs are gay.
They keep getting gayer.
Have you played Frogger? It turns you gay.
Yeah. See, you're only moving forward and you go side to side, but never backward. And then what is that frog trying to get to? That's right. The liberal dream. That's what it's trying to get to.
Yeah, it's trying to get to that socialist dystopia.
Purple hair, voting rights, a social democracy. Yeah. Come on now,
black
people.
President? Come on, we all know the score. A world in which Ben Shapiro's a good writer.
That's in the game Popes and Dreams, I believe.
It sure is. Oh, that is a pipe dream, buddy.
A Pope dream.
What's that? Is that the sound of freedom?
No, that's
the sound of bullshit.
That's the vacant emptiness.
That is. So anybody out there who believes in those kinds of conspiracy theories, not the fun ones like when we were younger, the QAnon adjacent ones, one thing you should know, and you should apply it to every single influencer in that genre, is they're trying to make money off of you. Period. You can apply that to even Joe Rogan. He just wants to make money off of you. That's the way it is. So think about that when you next turn on InfoWars or when Alex Jones tried to stuff dick pills down your throat. Think about it.
What service can I sign up for that, my friend?
All you have to do is turn on a podcast.
Yeah, these rhino boner pills, they're
I know exactly what you're talking about. Like I haven't had a rhino pill. Come on. They're just trying to scam you. That's all it is. It's a scam. Look into conspirituality. It's all a scam.
Yeah. There are no easy answers. There's no overarching plot. The world is chaos. Life is a mess.
Yeah, and when Steve Bannon says there are no conspiracies, but there are no coincidences, he's an idiot, because everything in the universe is a coincidence. There's causality and coincidence, and that's it. That's all there is, which is not dark or cynical. That's cool. Because now you can explore how the universe really works, which is way more interesting.
Yeah. Find a conspiracy that you can have fun with, not that you devote your life to and ruin other people's lives with.
Right, or I'm trying to overthrow the government in a sloppy way.
So anyway, thanks for listening to our podcast about video games.
In our dark existential dissection of the American psyche, but also a video game we talked about. We have more cool video game stuff coming up. We're not going to tell you right now. You don't want to hear about it here.
Yeah, no. You just have to get in your Mario pipe tunnel.
The internet's a series of tubes.
Again, thank you for listening to the podcast. If you did enjoy what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. We'd greatly appreciate it. If you want to rate us 5 Polybius machines on the podcast catcher app of your choice. Ideally, Apple Podcasts would be great. We'd greatly appreciate it. That is how we get heard and seen and spread out like a virus.
All right. Well, don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, on that note, to pay your tabs, clean up after yourself to some sort of reasonable degree. Don't forget to support your local comic shops and retailers. And from Dispatch Ajax, we would like to say Godspeed for Wizards.
Video games are destroying everything.
They're
turning us Polly and Bi and
trans.
Got you.
You can't see it, but Jake has just ripped his shirt.
Boner pills.
The real reason he was just served a notice of divorce from his wife. So no, Alex Jones, not Jake.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Please, go away.